Welcome. My name is Sarah Orsyth, and I work with the Data Lab. Welcome to this Data Lab community event. We're going to explore how to build a career in data and AI in the third sector. For those of you who don't know, the Data Lab community was created in June 2021 to enable data and AI professionals and enthusiasts like myself to connect, collaborate, learn, and grow. We have now over 3,500 members in 70 plus countries. So the Data Lab community is a place to be if you want to expand your network and share ideas and experiences with Data Lab professionals and enthusiasts. Today's event is part of a series of events showcasing what it's like to work in different industries and sectors in Scotland. This panel aims to provide insights and share knowledge from data professionals currently working in the third sector, including pathways into the industry and some of the key characteristics of their work. We hope that this will enable or help anyone considering their next step, be that the first job after graduation or to move into a new role or new sector, to understand more about the possibilities the third sector has to offer. According to the CVO, Scottish Voluntary Sector Statistics, the third sector has over 45,000 voluntary organizations, including almost 25,000 charities, and 8 out of 10 Scots use a charity every year. Data and AI skills are increasingly in demand across the sector, so we're really lucky to have 3 data professionals here today from the Data Orchard, Research Data Scotland, and Citizens Advice Scotland to join our panel today and share their experiences on working in the sector. As you're hearing from the panelists and they're answering the different questions that we're asking them and having these conversations, feel free to type into the Q&A box below on the bottom of your screen so that we can read out those questions after, and we'll have 15 minutes to ask questions directly to our panel. I'm now going to invite our panelists to introduce themselves briefly. So if we can start with you, Sian.
Hi, welcome everybody. My name is Sian Basker. I am co-chief executive of Data Orchard. Data Orchard is a social enterprise. We're 10 years old tomorrow, I think, or the day after. And we specialize in helping organizations to get better with data. And in particular, we work in the nonprofit sector. So our clients are charities, social enterprises, housing organizations, public sector. My role as co-chief executive, I obviously share the leadership role with my colleague, Madeline Spinks. So part of my role is very much about running and leading our company. But also I spend quite a lot of time winning business and quite a lot of time delivering a really broad range of projects with client organizations. I've been asked about my academic credentials. So I have a degree in mathematics and science and technology policy, and I have a master's degree in data science and analytics. I've worked for 30 years now in the nonprofit sector, in a real range of charities and social enterprises, local, national, international organizations. I've worked in specific individual organizations, but also in what are called infrastructure organizations, where you're serving multiple organizations, so you're kind of working at a more strategic sector level. I was originally a digital champion before I became a data champion. So I was 20 years working in digital technology before I had my second career epiphany into the world of data about a decade ago. I've worked in impact measurement, business development, leadership roles, and of course, lots in data. Over to you, Eleanor.
Great, thank you, Sian. That was really interesting background and such a long experience of this third sector. I've only worked in the third sector since April, so I'm a newbie to the whole thing. So it's going to be really interesting to hear your comments and thoughts on such a long career. Hi, I'm Eleanor. I'm a senior data analyst at Research Data Scotland. Research Data Scotland's a charity, and it was set up to connect researchers to Scotland's public sector, health, social care and administrative data. And our role really is trying to make that access easier and quicker so that data can be put together in different ways to try to help understand causes of significant societal challenges. My role is a fixed 2-year contract, and it's supporting delivery of Scotland's part of the Administrative Data Research UK project, which is a broader partnership across the UK trying to transform the way that researchers access the UK's wealth of public sector data. And that's really focusing on enabling, informing policy decisions that improves people's lives. So my role really is mainly working with external partners, particularly with the Scottish Government. The Scottish Government has a role that collates a lot of the administrative data to produce official statistics, and they're looking to broaden that and make it more available to researchers. And how we do that is we help to prepare the data for what's called ingest into the national safe haven, where researchers can then apply for approval to gain access to that information at sort of personal level. So again, a bit like Sian, I completed my first degree, well, it was probably over 30 years ago now, but in developmental biology in Aberdeen, but I quickly realised I wasn't going to be a laboratory scientist. So I took a master's and a PhD in what was called information science in those days. And then I spent probably 30 years working in scientific software support and various operational management roles. And I've done the full gamut from small and scaling startups in the private sector, a large biopharmaceutical company, a private company limited by guarantee, and finally Scottish Enterprise, which is an economic development agency and a non-departmental public body of the Scottish Government. And I took severance from Scottish Enterprise in, I think it was 2019, and I wasn't ready to retire, so I decided to go back to university and take a master's at Strathclyde in artificial intelligence and applications, and I was lucky to be supported by a data lab scholarship. And then I had an industrial placement to do my dissertation, which was quite challenging because it was during COVID lockdown, but that really gave me experience of working with administrative data and the challenges associated with administrative data. Once I graduated, I got a job at Effini as a data specialist, but I was made redundant from that earlier this year. And in April, I started this job at Research Data Scotland.
Amazing. Thank you both. So we're going to get started with the questions. The first one's for you, Sian. You kind of already answered it with your intro, but what attracted you to your current role?
Well, I would say my current role is kind of unusual in that I was one of the founders of our organisation, and I suppose we were entirely driven by passion. I think back in 2010, it was when there was all the kind of fanfare about big data, data's the new oil. I mean, when I went to do my master's degree, I imagined there were going to be sort of heralds sort of blowing trumpets as I arrived at university, because data analysts and data science was being seen as such a kind of heroic thing to do. But there was a genuine movement, and I think, you know, from within the non-profit sector, where there was a real excitement about the social and environmental and economic potential of data to make the world a better place, really. And there was some quite, I'd call them pioneering organisations like the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, who are massive on poverty and poverty data, and have, I mean, like, their history goes back hundreds of years. They did the first kind of slum poverty surveys in the slums of York in like 1860 or something. So it's not like data's never been, you know, a key part of campaigning for change and for rights and for a better world and you know, better lives for people. So in the fight for equality, I think that was the sort of passion for it. And I suppose in terms of my role, you know, our organisation started off as a kind of flat structure, 8 directors, people doing it out of passion, meeting in pubs to kind of plan our business. And then, you know, we grew very quickly. And so it took us 5 years really before we really became properly, I suppose, grown up. And I took on a shared role as co-CEO. And we, you know, really became, I suppose, much more professional organization. But that in itself has been a really important learning process about how you develop and run a business, how you're an entrepreneur. I mean, a lot of it's really sort of, I don't know, some of it's a bit frustrating around policy and contracting and VAT and HMRC and being an employer and all of those sorts of things. But it's also tremendously empowering to be able to be part of a great organization and to drive our direction in something that is a really exciting field in a great sector, working in a great sector.
I love that, of the balance between some of the challenges versus the passion that you have for the work that you do. So Eleanor, do you think that there's a particular working culture across the third sector, and how does that compare to the private sector? Because you've worked with both, and what's similar, what's different?
Yeah, so I mean, again, I find it really difficult to comment on this because I've just spent so little time in the third sector so far. So happy for Sian to jump in on this one. But I talked to a couple of colleagues and in fact a neighbour who have worked in the third sector in data for quite a time. And they really, it's just going to kind of pick up on what Sian was talking about there. So people in the third sector are choosing to work there because they are clearly, mission or purpose driven. They're not in it for the money. They're really in it for the impacts that they can make in particular areas that they have a passion about. And I think that's really clear from the limited time I've spent in here as well. However, I would say that there are private sector companies now that care much more deeply about that impact on people and places as well as profits. And that I think is really growing and being driven by the current generation that's entering the workforce too, and the kind of drivers and interests that they have as well. So I think that's maybe balancing out a little bit more, that kind of purpose driven is maybe going more in the sort of the private sector as well. I have really been struck by, the culture in Research Data Scotland. People really care and are passionate about, the purpose, but also I think that kind of reflects through onto the way that they interact with the people as well. So it's been a very welcoming experience. I have worked for a lot of places where it's been a lot tougher to get engaged with your other team members as well. But again, people are people. So no matter which sector you work in, you're always going to find people that are confident, not confident, dedicated, not engaged, strong-minded, challenging, easy to work with, etc. So yeah, that's all really been there, and I've just reflected that's really there for both. Sian, I don't know if you've got other things to add.
No, I would agree entirely with what you said there, Eleanor. And I think it's an interesting, deeply passionate sector, incredibly varied, and very diverse in the kind of work that it does, I guess, as much as any other, the business sector as well, I suppose. I would say it's very, the culture is very collaborative, and that's where in the realm of data sharing, or creating shared measures around data, or organizations with shared causes, it's a really exciting part of the work. And there's quite a lot of collaboration with other sectors as well. So public sector in particular, I would say there's some very exciting new ventures around data sharing and data sharing platforms with the public sector. But that said, it is also slightly competitive, and in that, the culture around the way the sector is funded often means that organizations that are trying to do similar things are also competing against their collaborators. So there's a bit of a paradox there.
Just kind of going back, just because you guys were both talking about passion and purpose driven, and how that's kind of combined against the private and the public sector and third sector. What are some of the things do you think that people listening should look for in an organization in terms of those passions and those values?
I mean, I think all organizations these days understand the importance of having clear values that state to the outside world, but also their own staff, what they stand for, how their culture should be judged, etc. as well. So I think that's something we should definitely, look for, make sure that you're aligned to, that you understand. Yeah, so I mean, obviously some places it looks like they've just kind of pulled things off the shelf, but I think you can tell when organizations have really spent time thinking about what their values and their mission and all that kind of thing are.
I would agree, and I think just following up on what you were saying, Eleanor, about the business sector becoming more values driven or more environmentally or socially driven. There's a whole new realm of B Corps is the title for sort of commercial organizations that have, I suppose, good ethical or social aims. And I think for my own part, because I run a social enterprise, so we are running as a business, we trade, we don't rely on any grants or income from other sources. So we do have to operate on a commercial model, but there is a huge and growing network of social enterprises that are about, you know, ethical trading and about fairness and equality and making a positive social and environmental difference in the world as well. So it's quite an interesting kind of patchwork. You know, there's the cooperative movement, there's the charity movement, there are small charities, there are super charities that are like, you know, the Macmillans of this world, and some of the international development charities are very exciting as well. And they've got whole departments of data people working for them. So it's quite a cutting edge time, I would say, for data in the non-profit sector.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a rich tapestry. You explained it really well there, but you also touched earlier on, you know, the challenge of securing funding to do specific things. And I think, you know, from the outside, I still consider myself on the outside looking in, it does look a very fragmented. In some areas, it looks very fragmented and very difficult to maybe differentiate between some charities and why they're there. And it does make me think how many of them are so close to the breadline that actually working in those areas, working in those companies, it's really quite scary and challenging because you're constantly having to chase hard to get the next piece of funding to come in, etc. Is that kind of how it feels at times?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they vary a lot. So the kinds of income models are different. So I mean, the pets will do very well. You know, people love to give. So in terms of donations or legacies, so certain kinds of, I mean, there's a big realm of research charities. And often linked to health. So, you know, diseases like cancer or Parkinson's disease, where, you know, there's an income stream that often may come from legacies or from family support that actually mean they're in relatively solid financial positions and in fact invest that money in order to create income streams. I think for many smaller organizations that are more reliant on grant income, and I would say this is probably the majority of the smaller to medium-sized organizations, is that it can be very insecure. You know, you're talking like maybe a 2-3 year contract, and then it will run out, and when will we get the next lottery grant? And that can be quite difficult in terms of career progression and job security, I would say.
I mean, I'll jump in. I've been working in the third sector up until the Data Lab for about 20 years, and I've been made redundant, you know, 4 or 5 times, but you believe so heavily in what you're doing that you're just like, I'm going to stick it through. And so I do kind of think it goes back to your comments of you're passionate about the work that you do and the people that you support. And I'm just going to attach one more question to this, and then we'll move on to what we've kind of already discussed. But you guys are talking about making an impact through data. Do you think that the third sector utilizes data appropriately? And do you think they have the funding and the resources to be able to do that? And I know there is a wide breadth from, as you were saying, very large organizations that have loads of funding, you know, and others that are, you know, day to day or year to year.
Yeah. Well, I would say it's a really mixed picture in the sector. I mean, one of the things that we have been specializing in is measuring data maturity in organizations. And we've done this across all sectors. So public sector, commercial, nonprofit, universities even. And what we see is there's a real mixed picture of, like, we've got a 5-stage model, and what we are seeing is that they're definitely advancing. So we're seeing much more in the sort of developing, mastering stages than ever before. And organizations are really working at it. They're really focused on data. So it's very difficult to say, you know, in any sector, actually. I think in any sector there are leaders and laggers. But one of the things that we've always been curious about is bigger better? Do the higher income organizations, are they more data mature than the smaller ones? And the answer has repeatedly been no. We look at it every year to see if there a pattern. Is it, I mean, you know, does it make a difference what geography organizations are working in? Interestingly, Scotland comes out quite well, actually. In fact, Scotland's top. When we take a geographic slant on, you know, this is hundreds of organizations. And it seems potentially make a difference what subsector they're in. So, I mean, you would expect those that are working in research, you would expect they are a bit better with data than perhaps more of the kind of perhaps religious and arts organizations that may typically be smaller. So yes, I don't think bigger is better, but definitely resources are an issue. And I think in terms of the career patterns, as I say, I think for an organization to hire a dedicated data role at a senior, I mean, there's lots that come in at more junior levels, like data officers, data managers, and that might be a good place to start for career professionals. But there's a massive growth in analysts coming in, and then in the more senior jobs, you see senior data analysts, senior engineers, head of data, director of data, and those are careers that are commanding quite high salaries now, but of course inevitably tend to be in larger organizations.
I think the only thing I would add to that, I completely agree with everything Sian said. I think you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like there is a willingness to collaborate. I think you said this earlier, willing to collaborate. Does that extend as far as sharing data, or does it extend as far as sharing resources to assess data? And again, that competition piece you touched on as well might make that more challenging. But I think there are organizations around that are set up specifically to help the smaller charities understand how to use their data better, get some of the skills that they need to do that, etc. Which, okay, you can pay for that in the private sector through consultancy, but quite a lot of these organisations appear to be, again, staffed by volunteers who will give their time to the third sector charity kind of area free of charge, at least to get you started, and then maybe look to do that kind of thing. Is that fair?
Absolutely, and I can share a list of resources afterwards. I mean, there is a whole network of pro bono schemes which are fantastic. They range from spreadsheet pampering through to kind of data science stuff. So DataKind UK is a charity that matches up volunteers with charities to work on projects for free. And I would also say that the opportunities in terms of sharing data and sharing roles come around. So sometimes you have networks. So I know of, for example, in nature trusts or in housing, for example, there's a lot of data sharing where they've agreed data standards within their sector, which enables them to campaign, really. If they're campaigning for policy change or the attention of politicians to particular issues like domestic violence or young people and mental health, there are some fantastic resources that are being shared. Like What Works Wellbeing is magnificent as a place for data around wellbeing, which is a lot of what the sector's about.
I'm just we could stay here all day and I would love to continue to do that, but I'm going to kind of move on into people who want to start in a third sector data career. So starting a job in any new sector can be kind of daunting. How were you supported in the earlier days in terms of your organizations, or also do you have any tips for new starts? And I'll start with Eleanor and then we'll move on to Sian.
Yeah, I was supported really well with the new start. I mean, it helps. Our head of data is really switched on and has done a lot of previous roles like this, so she's really understands how to onboard people, etc. And there was quite a lot of us that came on roughly at the same time as well, which always helps too. So you aren't kind of on your own as the newbie. So we used to be counting, and I'm the newest here. I've only been here 3 weeks. I've been here 4. That kind of thing. So that kind of helped. There was a lot of new people starting together. I mean, I think if I had any hints and tips, it's you may think that your role in data is all about sitting in front of a screen crunching numbers. Actually, it isn't. You need to get out there and you need to engage with your team members, with the rest of the organization, but you also need to understand who the customers are, the clients are. So really inviting yourself along to meetings that help you understand that. You don't have to say anything, but at least you're soaking it all up and understanding that. And that really helps you to understand the kind of stories that you need to start the data being able to tell. And I think Sian's already touched on this. The only other thing I would think about is, be prepared to move organizations on your way up the ladder. Don't expect that you're going to have a full career in one organization, although I don't think the expectation is like that anymore, like it was when I started work. So, and the final thing I would just say is be prepared about the hassle of trying to move your pension. having just done it myself, pension freedoms are easier now, but it's still a hassle trying to move. So every time you move a job, you have to take out a new pension or that kind of thing. It just becomes really challenging if you have multiple jobs, etc. So those are my kind of key tips.
The pain for the pension is real, because I can tell you I have 4 from 5 different countries. So that is a really good tip. Sienna, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose what I feel is, I mean, I felt very lucky in my first job was in a sort of renegade research unit at Manchester Metropolitan University. And I had as quite a maverick boss, but somebody who pushed me out there a lot and gave me lots of opportunities. And I was totally out of my depth, talking at conferences in Spain at the age of 22 about at the time, my first career epiphany was all around the discovery of the internet and evangelizing about that. So this was like early 90s. But I think getting into a role where you have got the opportunity to be out of your depths and therefore learn really fast is something that I personally really valued and would look for, or would encourage others to look for, is to kind of find roles that you have some freedom to grow. The other things I'd say about it really are about opportunities to keep learning. Like this is such a fast-moving field we're in. I mean, just the speed of change and new tools and techniques and applications of what we're doing is so fast-moving. So I think just either keeping moving within your role or between roles is a great suggestion. And also peer support. So there's this community itself. There are lots of other communities as well. We run something called the Data Folk Club, which is about people who are working in non-profits in data roles. Just an opportunity to come together once a month for a chat over lunch and just learn from each other and explore different topics. And there's so much going on in that kind of learning world and lots of networking opportunities. And if you're really smart, I probably didn't care about it so much in my younger career, but now I would say I look for quality in the staff well-being and growth and development opportunities. There used to be something called Investors in People, and I think it's still around, and that was quite a useful badge of credentials that would mean organisations invested in their staff, and that's quite a valuable thing.
I completely agree, because I think in nonprofits you tend to be a small group, and so a lot of the weight of the organization falls on your shoulders. So I think that well-being is something that's really, really vital. I'm going to move on to skills needed, and I'm going to actually put a couple of the questions that were asked in first. So somebody here from Vincent is asking, what are some like the basic, if you're just starting off in your journey for data, what are some of the things, like is there a TED Talk? Are there any resources that you would recommend for someone who's just starting and interested in going into the third sector?
Well, I would say it kind of depends, in that, I mean, what we find talking to professionals in the sector is you become a bit of a jack of all trades, sort of quite quickly, because very often you might be the only data person in an organization. I mean, you can be more specialist and specialized in larger teams and larger organizations. But you might find that you're the data engineer, the data visualization person. You might be the person who's designing surveys, who's building apps and APIs between tools. You might be building dashboards. So it can be I mean, it is in itself a vast career field, isn't it? I don't think even until I started my own master's degree, realized how many different roles there are and how many different kinds of skills. So I suppose I would look closely at the job descriptions and see. I wouldn't be put off by any job descriptions. I would say if you've got like 60-70% of what's there, I would go for it, because quite often employers don't even know what they're looking for, and the job will evolve with your skills.
Eleanor, I'm going to ask you, kind of leading on to that with the skills, like what are some of the technical skills do you think that are essential for the third sector? And are there any platforms that are more commonly used?
So I'm not aware that there are any sort of unique skills that are required for the third sector that wouldn't also apply if you were a data person in any of the other sectors as well. And again, there's such a breadth of different tools and techniques that are used. A lot of us who are working here at Research Data Scotland maybe started and are fairly recent graduates. We've all come from a Python background, but we are standardizing on R here. I learned Fortran programming many years ago, and actually I thought it would be really difficult to pick up programming again, but actually it's the mindset about how you lay out a problem and a solution to a problem that is the main thing, and then what language you use to then code that. I think once you know one language, you can use the internet, I think we talked about earlier, etc., to and indeed chat GPT, I understand, to understand how things work in different languages, etc. So probably from that angle. I mean, I think when I graduated, I wasn't really clear what all the different flavors of data people were, and even taking time. Somebody was asking earlier about TED Talks and things like that, but I think the Data Lab has some really useful information about the different types of roles that people can do in data, and really trying to think about yourself, what you want, what skills you have, to try and understand, well, am I a data engineer, or am I a data scientist, or am I a data analyst? But as Sian said, there's overlap between all these different roles as well. So finding a position that either gives you the real narrow focus that really floats your boat, or gives you the general, well, I could do a little bit of this and a little bit of that, is something really important to go for, as Sian said. So I think that was, yeah.
Probably some of the TED, I mean, it's an old TED Talk, but I absolutely love it. One of my gurus, he's died now, but oh gosh, I'm having a complete blank. Hans Rosling on TED was like, he was part of my career epiphany, really. He was a Scandinavian health economist and he did some of the most amazing global health inequality dynamic visualizations that were really groundbreaking a decade ago. And I still think there's a lot in that kind of realm around the potential of data for big change. Yeah.
I mean, that kind of leads back into the next question I have, which are like, what are some of the impacts that data science and AI has had in your organization and the services you offer, maybe the current one or in previous ones, be it, private or the third sector?
Well, I would say, actually, I mean, we will use lots and lots of different tools. We also use R very extensively, but many of the team use Python. We use all kinds of APIs and modeling tools and data processing kind of analyses. And I mean, in fact, and I would say this is quite common in, I think the idea that you're just working with one data set is one of the things to really avoid, because in any organization, even in really small organizations, and I would say this of the non-profit sector, is it's quite complex. I would say it's much more complex in the non-profit sector as an operating model than it is in the private sector. The private sector model generally says, client gives me some money, I give them the product or service, and that's quite straightforward. But actually in the non-profit sector, you've got a whole range of stakeholders. So you might have a set of clients and service users, but you're also likely to have a group of volunteers, you'll probably have a group of donors, you'll have a group of funding organizations, in all different kinds of timeframes, and there'll be lots and lots of, and I don't think this is unique to the non-profit sector, but you'll have a whole set of databases and CRM systems and MailChimp marketing stuff, and maybe a donors database, and there'll be like 50 or 60 of these, and that's without actually discovering all of those secret squirrel spreadsheets that people have, because they don't like the systems, and the systems don't work for them. Everybody's got a little group of their own secret squirrel spreadsheets that they use. So it's fascinating. It's a fascinating world of discovery to explore all of those different tools and systems, technologically. But it's also as much about people. And I would say, the skills for people around communication are the ones that are probably more critical, because a lot of people don't get data. So your ability to be able to work with your colleagues and bring the best out of them and their data and make data valuable and useful in their roles is perhaps one of the most rewarding things that you'll get to do.
I had a very specific example of the impact of kind of artificial intelligence and modelling, really, which is, Research Data Scotland and ADR Scotland are all about making personal data available to researchers in a secure way. So, personal data gets, anonymised and stored in what's called the National Safe Haven. And researchers can apply to get access to that, but can only get access to that if they can demonstrate the research they're going to do is for public good. And before they have to do all the research in this kind of safe haven. So they can't bring anything in from the outside. They're just on the computers there. And the safe havens have a way of checking any outputs that are going to go and then be published in research. And that's all set up around statistical analysis. So everything they've done to this point has been about statistical analysis, and the teams that do these are amazing, because they can look at a graph and say, well, that is done in such a way that that person there could be identified if we publish that. So you need to go away and think about how you would do things differently. They don't know how to work with artificial intelligence outputs, with models that are built. How do you test that to see, can somebody be identified if this is used and released further down the line? So that's having a real impact on the processes that they're going to have to use going forward, the training that they're going to have to receive, because, the public so far have been quite comfortable with this usage of their data. But if there were any scandals about data getting available that shouldn't be available, then that whole thing starts to crumble, and then we lose a fantastic resource that helps us to shape societal issues going forward and make policies and things like that. So it's a real important thing that we understand how you can do that. And it's obviously live right now with all the changes that are being made with ChatGPT and things like that. So it is going to change how we all work. This is a bit of a scary time to work out how do you get your processes updated quickly to keep pace with what's going on.
Absolutely. And I'd add to that, I mean, I know of examples of AI being used, when it's with things like, so plants, or I came across a museum recently that had been using AI to predict the fragility of their collection of things. So those are kind of very tangible and kind of quite straightforward because they're things. But one of the key things about the voluntary sector or the non-profit sector is it very often works with people who are perhaps the most vulnerable and disadvantaged. And so the responsibility for those organizations around the security and the ethics around how they approach data is really important. But I have also seen really exciting pseudonymized data being used where actually these data is being shared on platforms, and that's kind of security, particularly around health risk and modeling risk, risk among vulnerable children, risk of heart disease is a really exciting area. So there's quite a, certainly in that kind of medical research world, and probably all of the scientific research, and I imagine a lot in the environmental world as well, but there's the opportunities around some of that AI and predictive analytics is exciting territory.
I'm looking forward to reading more about it. But I think one of the kind of going on to, we've talked about the tech skills and how it's kind of quite diverse. And now going to the soft skills, one of the things that you mentioned was, Sam, was about being able to communicate a technical concept to someone who's non-technical, and kind of going to what you're talking about, Eleanor, of making sure that you are, achieving the objectives of your client base. What do you think are the top 3 soft skills, not just technical skills, that are needed for the third sector? I'm going to start with you, Eleanor, and then I'm going to go on to you, Sam.
So I think being able to empathize with your customers, clients, people that you work with, goes to what Sian said earlier about, you're usually working with very vulnerable people or in very vulnerable areas. So you need to empathize with them. Storytelling, I touched on storytelling earlier. I think it's a highly underrated skill, although I think maybe it's becoming more rated now than it was. So being able to use your data to tell a story, not, that sounds like you're making things up, and I don't mean it in that way. I mean, you're actually being able to engage people in, what the data is telling them. So that ability to really engage with people, I think, are sort of two of the most important things. But then also having an eye to the quality of what you're doing. You really need to think about the fact that you decisions will be made on the basis of the data that you are producing. Therefore, you have to be very clear that you've gone about it in a very sort of thorough, professional way, and that you're comfortable that the outputs that you're giving can be used in that way. So that's a bit of a responsibility that you carry in the kind of role of data analyst, etc. So I think those are maybe the top three I would use.
Yeah, I'd like to follow on from those, mostly because I've had a bit more time to think about it, Ellen. But actually, allied to that, that last one, I mean, I think sometimes I would say diplomacy is a really important skill. And I think sometimes there is an expectation, perhaps from senior leaders, that the data will be certain, that there will be certainty in the data, and it will be a clear thing of what decision they need to make. And often, I hate to say it, but often leaders are looking for data that will reinforce their existing beliefs or ideas that they want to implement. So there is a diplomacy challenge there, because as we know, very often the data is not certain at all. And so kind of being diplomatic or trying to hold your own, and it's around, I suppose, honesty and quality, isn't it, in that realm. And I suppose allied to that also the sort of the questioning and challenging of, sometimes data really doesn't hold up the existing beliefs, and it can be quite hard, especially in areas like impact measurement, where I know people work really, really hard in the sector. And so when we start looking at impact and what the long-term difference an organization makes in the world, it's quite tricky to get that data and to be able to attribute it specifically to the interventions of that organization. But also that organization needs to be honest about what it can and can't promise in terms of what it can deliver. So I think questioning and challenging, and again, diplomacy comes in there a lot, because you have to invite your colleagues to question their assumptions sometimes, and that's hard, but probably important. And then there's the kind of championing, really. I just think trying to get people engaged and interested, your ability to influence and motivate and inspire people. And sometimes that means endlessly stripping out all of the detail and the complexity to try and make it really easy and simple. And a lot of people really hate data and really don't get data. So you can't underestimate what a challenge that is. And so being inspirational yourself and being positive and slightly evangelical, I would say, for the cause is one of my tips.
I love all those. We're getting a lot of questions from the audience on what are the things that you're looking for in the third sector if you're hiring. And then the second question is kind of around, should you go from third sector to kind of the private sector, or private sector to the third sector? And what you both have done kind of the jump. So the first question is like, what are the things that you're looking for in your organization when you're hiring? What are those skills? And then we'll go on to what direction should be followed.
I would say, looking at the jobs, looking at what we hire in our organization, we're looking primarily actually for people who share our values. So values is a very big thing, and will, being part of that culture of the organization. I think it's the ability to learn. So it's not necessarily what people come with, but their capacity to learn and teach themselves and be kind of self-motivated. We're not expecting people to be spoon-fed in any way. But the skills are kind of quite different, and people have different specialisms. So some people specialize in, GIS type data and mapping worlds. Some people are more kind of architecture-y and geeky modelling. I mean, some people don't actually like working frontline with customers and would much prefer to be back office working on the stuff and giving somebody else to be the kind of communication front. So I think, and I think there are lots of people who have different strengths and weaknesses, and some who are more introvert and extrovert. And I think I would see beyond any of those things and look at the person and what they bring and what potential they have, I would say. I do have some other views and some other research about jobs and careers in the sector, but I'll let Eleanor speak first.
I think those are great points, Sienna. I mean, I think I would probably go back a little bit to the earlier conversation we were having. We're just hiring a data analyst now. We've had a really positive, good response to the open position that we have, which has been great. And I think the things that differentiate the people who've maybe got a strong technical background to the ones that we think might fit in the third sector, it goes back to that volunteering piece we talked about earlier. So I would be looking for people who have a strong social driver, strong social conscience. So they probably, the best way you can demonstrate that when you're starting out in your career is to do some volunteering. So in Scotland here, we've got the Scottish Tech Army. You already touched on DataKind, Sian. So there'll be other organisations as well. So there are lots of opportunities to volunteer. That has two parts really to it. One is that you get something that you can write on your CV. It gets you experience, but it also gets you that nurturing that Sian talked about earlier as well, because there are usually other people who are volunteering as well. And part of the driver for them is making sure they're helping others through the charity work that they do, but also others in their team as well. And I've certainly found that with the Scottish Tech Army, that people have been very welcoming and helpful about how you do things in a slightly different area than I've been exposed to before, etc. So looking for those volunteering opportunities, making sure you have them on your CV, but also that you're able to talk to them when you come in for interview as well. It's just another one I would add to what Sian has already kind of said. So I'll back to you, Sian, because you had more to add.
I suppose the main thing to add is that there's a massive skills shortage around data in the non-profit sector. And we've been tracking, in fact, my colleague Ben, who was due to speak instead of me today, runs a weekly newsletter called Interesting Data Roles in Non-Profits. And he's been tracking what kind of roles are coming out, what kind of salary ranges they are, what kinds of organizations they are. And we'll be doing a blog very soon, sharing like a year-long project of weekly data around hundreds and hundreds of roles. And it is interesting. What we're seeing is that they often struggle to recruit. So we're watching the roles that have been re-advertised and whether they were like how much more money they were the second time around. We've been watching kind of salary ranges and comparing against organizations, but there's lots out there. And it's really encouraging. I find it really encouraging to see all these jobs. And I'm really hoping that my colleagues don't take them. It's a bit scary having a member of your staff looking at tracking the jobs market. But yeah, I think there's a real appetite and growth in the sector around this. And I know a lot of our clients that we've worked with have struggled to recruit people with that combination, I would say, of the technical skills and the experience of working in the sector. So Eleanor's suggestion about volunteering is one approach. Another is that you might just, take a job and work it for a year or two and then move on to another job and build your professional network within the field. And some of those volunteers who have volunteered through DataKind or through other pro bono schemes have actually worked in the private sector and shifted over to the non-profit sector. Or indeed, and I would, as an entrepreneur, I would encourage this, is that there's the opportunity also to set up in your own business or to join other small businesses and freelance. So those organizations that might not be able to afford a full-time person, then there is another whole career world of like freelancing and having multiple clients and multiple organizations. And in that way, you get a lot of different working environments and types of organizations that you can gain experience from.
I'm aware of the time, and so I'm going to ask some of the questions that we have in the chat, but please feel free to start typing them in if you have any more. A lot of them kind of link to what we were talking about. So a question from Andrew is, we talked about if you're a data scientist wanting to go into the third sector, But Andrew's asking, like, is it realistic for someone to go in the other direction? So they've worked in the third sector and want to become a data scientist. What are the data skills that you would suggest someone needs to develop if they already have the managerial, operational third sector experience?
So
Well,
I'll jump
yeah,
in while
please.
Sian's thinking. I could see her thinking face on there. So as somebody who's kind of done that, I suppose really. So I didn't really have, my data skills were certainly nascent. I suppose really they weren't up to speed at all. And again, having just gone through the sort of the data analyst application process, so people have applied for the data scientist role here, data analyst role, sorry. I think you can go about it in different ways. So some people have gone for the master's approach. So they've just gone all out for taking a master's in data science, whatever. And there's lots of different flavors of masters in data science now. So you can probably find one that fits from your background and your experience. But also you can do it through continuing professional development as well. So you can take short courses. I think University of Edinburgh, I know, runs them. So there'll be other universities and other organisations that run short courses that you can try tasters of. What is data engineering and what is Python and all this kind of stuff. So you can kind of build it up that way as well. What I think we really look for is people who've, I think you said it earlier, Sian, hunger to learn. So, they want to do something. They're not just saying, I'm stagnating here. They're actually showing that they're trying to build their skill sets, etc. So you don't have to go all out for a master's. You can do it through sort of CPD kind of route as well. Sian, looks like you've thought about it now, so you'll have a much better answer.
Well, as you're talking, I will say I have actually got a t-shirt that just says invalid syntax error, all the way down. And I was absolutely terrible at Python. It really crushed me. But of course, there were so many different kinds of tools around, there's the whole world of network flows, for example, is a whole, if you want to work in festivals and work out where different stages should be and how the exit routes should be placed in order for people to get ambulances in if necessary, there's the whole realm there. And every time I go to a festival, I'm fascinated by how they're getting the cars in. I mean, I don't think they give enough attention to the ladies' toilets still, but the kind of, there's sort of like totally different realms, the whole supply chain management, on one hand, for me, and working in a non-profit sector, I think supply chain, I can't imagine how that works for my sector, but actually in certain contexts, you do realize that is transferable. So I think there's a lot that's transferable, whatever sector you're in. And as Eleanor says, I think the willingness to learn, and if there are particular skills, I mean, I think there's such a shortage of skilled people in this field that, as I say, I think you can get any job with a good 60-70% with the right soft skills around it and the ability to learn. And in fact, there's so much out there that is, the online courses you can do. Like for our own organization, we wouldn't even touch doing any coding training at all because there's so much free and available. But the kinds of training that actually there's a massive gap for is basic data literacy. So people who are like able to communicate and train other people to explain data or visualize or communicate data is a real gap. And there's a real gap we see in leadership, of not data leadership, but leadership as in CEOs and senior teams and organizations around the potential of data, the opportunity that it offers, as well as the scary responsibilities that they now have.
I mean, going on to that point, the community platform. So I signed up for a free Python course, which I was also horrendous at, through the community platform. So it's a great resource in terms of, yeah, I might buy one just like you. So that's another resource if you guys are interested in learning that. We have a couple more questions, and then I'm just going to end on one of them is like, are you aware of any recruitment agencies that cater at least specific to B Corp? That's probably, I don't know if it's a Sienna or an Eleanor question. And then the other question that's kind of similar is, what is the name of the organization that links volunteers and charities around data tasks? I'm not sure if that's the Scottish Tech Army, if there was one that you'd mentioned, Sienna. So I'm not sure if you guys have answers to either of those two.
I will drop a couple of links into the chat. We've got a whole list of data support providers, of which there are at least 4 or 5 pro bono schemes in there, in our resources. So there's the OR Society is another one, the Operational Research Society. Pro Bono Economics is another scheme. I'll drop this link into the chat now, and you can have a little roam through that list.
While Sian's doing that, what would you guys say? One of the questions we have is, on average, do third sector's organizations offer less salary compared to private sector companies, but maybe better work-life balance? Eleanor, if you want to start with that while Sian's putting that into the chat.
Yeah, do I think that again, like all sectors, I'm sure it varies. I don't think that the pay necessarily is hugely different. What might be challenging is the benefits package. So pay and benefits come together, and public sector pay is not as good, but your benefits are great. Your private sector, you've got pay and bonuses, and your benefits are pretty good. But it's a very generic thing to say, and I'm sure there are examples where actually, in the third sector, the pay is fine and the benefits are fine. But I think you just have to look at the specifics for the organizations that you're interested in working for. And the work-life balance, there is definitely an appetite in the organization I work for accommodating people's work-life balance. So quite a lot of people don't work the full week, or they work compressed hours. I think everybody gets to work from home to some degree at the moment, but it feels like that is probably more prevalent in the third sector, with a lot of people being encouraged to go back to work in the private sector now. But yeah, I think I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer to that.
Just putting I think I did put the links into the chat, but I couldn't actually put them in the Q&A. So I don't know if that's something you can do, Sarah, on my behalf. Yeah, I would agree. I mean, in looking for any employer, I think the work-life balance thing has, staff well-being is a massive thing. And I think kinds of work that we do is quite intense mentally. And so I feel it's particularly important to to ensure when you work for an organization that they offer you flexibility, and that, I mean, in our own organization, we have all kinds of, well-being walks that we go on, that we have fun sessions, we have lean coffee, we have like chat times, we have a bit of face-to-face and celebration time as well. I think that's always really important, that there's a bit of social and a bit of celebration. Otherwise, you just feel like a sort of data monkey kind of at your desk, just doing that all the time. So I think the balance of online and face-to-face is important.
So I'm just going to ask the last question and then the end, which is, one person was asking, what are your top tips on how to get back into data science after a career break? And then the last, I'll let you guys answer that very quickly, and then we'll do the very last question before we end.
Well, I would say I was 48 when I went to do my master's degree in data science. And I was certainly one of few women and few parents, I think, on the course. And I think the tenets anyway about just keep learning, get your qualifications, gain the experience, and network, keep finding ways to network with people and keep those sort of channels to the world open, and try things. There are, I mean, I don't know in Scotland at the moment, but there have been a whole lot of apprenticeship schemes, which I find quite exciting, because there's a tendency almost across all fields where they've realized they've got a diversity problem, where perhaps traditionally they will have hired lots of people who had, mathsy, sciencey subjects, and they had great grades because they were so brilliant academically, even though I've got a whole bugbear about the education system. But actually, the sort of diversity around people's ability to multitask, people to be able to problem solve, people's ability to teamwork, ability to see things very differently, and this is a whole thing around the whole neurodiversity field, is like, actually what you need people who are going to look at things really differently to everybody else. And so there's much more openness, I would say, for an opportunities and new apprenticeship schemes that are coming on, who are not seeking traditionally academically qualified, or even people who have had, a standard career, whatever that is, in this day and age. So I would say just look out there, reach out and try things. And if they don't work, move on quickly to something else.
So the last question I have for both of you is, we'll start with Eleanor. What's next?
So as I say, I'm on a 2-year fixed term. So I have to be thinking about what's next, because that's not that far away now. But touching on what Sian just said, I've never really planned my career. Jobs have come along and I've looked at them and I've thought, oh, that looks quite interesting. And sometimes I've been successful in getting the ones I think look interesting, and sometimes I haven't. As you said yourself, Sarah, you get made redundant when you didn't expect it, so you then have to look for another job. So I'm not planning too far ahead, but I'm hoping that the experience I have here and the skills I have from my previous job, plus keeping my eyes open, will mean that the next job will come along and I'll be able to do something really valuable. Because at this stage of my career, I'm not really looking to make huge amounts of money. I'm just looking to really have a fun time and add some value back into the society.
Right. So at Data Orchard, we're planning the next 3 years. So I'm hoping I'll be around for the next 3 years in this role. We have a big ambition. So we've just launched our outsourced data team service, which is really for organizations that can't afford, or they don't even know how to hire or what they want necessarily. And we have my great dream is that we would create that as a career training opportunity to bring on new people into the sector and to be able to place them and support them through a number of clients, and ultimately see them into new jobs that are being created in the sector. So that's my grand project for the next few years.
I just want to say thank you to you both. I think kind of the things we've learned is you need to tell data stories, was something Eleanor mentioned quite a lot. I think the impact that you can make through data and the diversity of that data, and just the breadth and depth of what the third sector can do in Scotland, be it from a data science side to the actual impact with people's lives. So I think you guys have kind of given us a really good vision of what the third sector looks like from a data perspective. So I really want to say thank you to you. And also, please join the Data Lab community if you're not already. There's a QR code at the bottom of the screen. It's a great way to hear more inspirational speakers like Sian and Eleanor. So if we can give a virtual round of applause to you both. Thank you so much for all of your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.